Hello, welcome to Real Life Church. I'm Stacy, and I'm so glad that you are with us today. We have a lot of things going on in the life of the church that we want to make sure that you know about. The first of which, next Sunday is Bacon Sunday. So if you're not able to be with us here in person, but you're gonna still join us online, maybe make some bacon to enjoy at home. That's gonna take place at both of our service times here in person, 9 and 10:30. And it's one of the fun ways that we celebrate Father's Day, so don't miss it. Invite someone new maybe to join you for the very first time. Could even be online for a bacon party. We are so thrilled. We love celebrating things as a church, but so thrilled to celebrate the baptisms last Sunday of Nathan Bensal as well as Hanna Bensal. You're gonna see their pictures in just a moment if you're not seeing them already. Nathan is an awesome middle schooler who actually serves on Sunday mornings in our early childhood team, on our team, in our rooms. He's an amazing kid, and he was ready to publicly declare his faith. And then sweet Hannah is an older elementary kid who also serves on our children's ministry team, and we are so thankful for them both, for the example that they are setting by serving, by publicly declaring their faith, by inviting others in to know who Jesus is. And church, we just want to take a minute to say thank you so much for who you are and how significantly you give to the church. When you give, you make it possible for kids and students like Hannah and Nathan to get to come to church for the very first time, to encounter leaders and church members who love Jesus and who want to share Jesus's light and truth and love with the next generation. So thank you so much for how generous you are. You can always go to reallife.la/give if you have questions about giving, if you're ready to step forward into giving. We have a treat for you today. There's a new person that's gonna be, not new to the church, but somebody different teaching for us today. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw to him, and I'll see you right here after that.
Well, hey there, Real Life. My name is Anthony. I'm one of the pastors here at the church, and I'm so glad to be joining you today online, whether you're watching on our YouTube channel, on Facebook, if you're listening to the podcast. Thanks for carving out part of your day to spend time with us. Now, we don't always get to spend time together outside of me making announcements once in a while on our YouTube channel. So I thought I would catch you up to speed on something my family's been up to this year. We decided to take this adventure of fostering dogs for our local animal shelter. We have a friend who had let us know that the shelter in Pomona, which is near where we live, has capacity, it has kennels for about 75 dogs that it cares for, and currently its population is a little over 200, which is too many dogs to have in a spot that's built for 75, right? So many of these dogs are doubled up and tripled up, and our family saw that and said, well, we want to help. And so one at a time, we'll start bringing those dogs home and kind of teaching them how to be with a family. You don't really learn in those kennels how to be a family dog, and so teaching them how to be with a family and then launching them out as a way to for my kids to learn how to have a dog around, but additionally for us to get to know some of the people at the shelter. Some of you don't know what my family looks like. This is them. This is my family, and we've actually started this social media account just for these dogs, and so some of you are like, I've seen this before. Some of you, you're visiting, so welcome. So glad you're here. Some of you know that you like just pictures of dogs, and so I want to show you some of them. I want to show you the first dog that we brought home. Her name was Nana. And so Nana came home with us, and Nana just didn't have a lot of energy. She'd been in the shelter for months by the time that we circled around and brought her home. And so it took her some time to kind of remember what it's like to be around people. She started lifting her eyes up and looking at the world around her again. And then as dogs tend to look like they're doing, she started smiling. She was a happy dog again. She knew how to be around people. And just as we really got to know Nana and her personality, and that she loves going for trail runs and enjoys kind of just hanging out in the backyard with us, a family came and adopted her, and we said goodbye. So then we went back to the shelter. We met a dog named Lena. Lena also had been in the shelter for a while and had forgotten how to be a people dog. And so her first couple days with us was mostly just her resting and recovering. And then she made a shift into kind of keeping watch and kind of watching that front yard, mostly to make sure that the cats in the neighborhood stayed away. And I don't fault her for that. And as Lena began watching over things, we would bring her over to the church sometimes to hang out while I was at work. And she started just enjoying being out and around people. And Lena, floppy ear and all, ended up meeting a family who was so excited to bring her home to live with them. And all of that time that we invested in spending time with Lena paid off because she got adopted, but then we had to say goodbye again. You sense the pattern? Then we met Polly. And some of you, if you actually spend time with us here in person on Sundays, got to meet Polly. Polly, through no fault of her own, ended up hanging out with me on a Sunday morning, Christine and I, and trying to work on our calendar and plan out how things were going to go. I knew she was going to be out of town one weekend. And it's not that I forgot that, on Sundays I'm a little busy, but I didn't think through this dog we just brought home a couple days earlier. Where is she going to go? And so she came with me and hung out with me on a Sunday. She met so many of you, and Polly is great with people, but man, does she have a thing against squirrels. And this one day she saw in our backyard, there was a squirrel up one of our trees. And because she at one time saw a squirrel in that tree, every single time Polly went into our backyard, she made sure there was not a squirrel in that tree ever again. And Polly ended up this last week, as she got more acclimated with us and became more of herself and really remembered what it was like to be around people, Polly went for her last car ride with us because she then got adopted by this sweet couple, Jim and Pam. Not the ones from Scranton, they live closer. And she went home with them. And we had to say goodbye again. And my kids had to say goodbye again. But then we met Cinnamon. And Cinnamon came home with us this last week. And Cinnamon, again, when we brought her home, just needed a place to rest, to recover, to remember what it's like to be a dog who's not doubled and tripled up in a shelter. And Cinnamon has kind of learned to kind of put her eyes up again, to notice the world around her in a way that is new, but is remembering a time when she already knew how to do that. And man, Cinnamon is a happy dog. We're a week in. And though I love having her with us, I'm looking forward to the time when we get to launch her out again. You see, we said yes to fostering dogs because we want to do just, a nice thing for dogs. There's a lot in the shelter. We want to help them out one at a time. It also has given us a chance to get to know the people who work and volunteer at the shelter. As a pastor, I spend a lot of my time with you and with you, whether you're here in person or sometimes emailing back and forth. And it gets a little tricky for us to get to know people outside of the church. So I'm always looking for ways to get involved in the community, that I can meet people who don't yet come to our church and invite them into things. And there's even a receptionist now at the shelter who almost every time I go in there, we pick up food for whatever dog we have each week. And every time I do, she asks, when's your church's next party? Because she came to one time and you did such a great job of welcoming her in that now she's looking for when the next one is on the calendar. So good job, church. You're making my job a little bit easier. So we are involved in the shelter to get to know people, but also, right, like as a parent, I want to raise kids who do things that are hard. And, training a dog how to be with people again, there's a lot of work there. And it's even harder to then say goodbye to them. And really, I want my kids to know how to do hard things with others in mind, right? That others might benefit from it. There's this thing that happens in parenting where, and if you've parented before, this is not news to you, we have a sense of the world that is coming for our kids. It's different than the world that we grew up in, but we know those experiences they're probably going to have as adults, and so we're trying to get them ready for that, right? And we meet them in the midst of them being young people, and man, it's the most in love they've ever felt, or it's the most angry they've ever been at a person when their friendships are having hard times, and they're having these these big feelings, these big emotions, these big milestone moments, and we as their parents get to come alongside them, be with them in those feelings, but also we know, oh, you think this is love, you're gonna love so much deeper later. Oh my gosh, you're angry now, just wait until, right? And so we get to kind of shape their world a bit to get them ready for those things that are next for them. And so for my kids, I wanna raise kids who now learn how to do things for others, that when I launch them from my home, which is coming soon, in the next year and a half, I'll start launching them out. I wanna launch people who know how to care for others. And in some ways, pastoring is similar. In some ways, the work that Pastor Jim and I get to do here at the church is similar. And here's how. Being a pastor, it's a weird job. Anytime I have to try to explain, here's what I do to people, it doesn't quite make sense to them, but I try to say it this way. We get to be alongside you as you go through life, right? And we get to point you toward God, hoping that your connection to God will sustain you even longer than our relationship with you will. It's like this. There's a picture I want to show you. It's going to come up on the screen. If you're listening on the podcast, you'll have to picture it. It's a wedding that I officiated this last year, the Revelos. So good job, Revelos. It was a great party, great day. And at the end of the ceremony, there's this moment, happens in every wedding, where the couple walks back down the aisle. All attention is on them. And if you notice, if you're watching us online, you'll notice in the picture, I'm there, but I'm pretty blurred out, right? I'm in the background. And that is the life of a pastor. We are there, but kind of in the background. We're a little bit blurry, and we kind of like it that way. But it does mean that we're there alongside you when you go through so many of life's kind of big moments. And you as a person will go through a person amount of things, right? You will, if you fall in love, you'll fall in love a person amount of times, right? You will, if you get married, you'll get married a person amount of times, which hopefully, right, if we're keeping promises, we're working on that, is once. That's the goal there. If you have kids, you'll have kids a person amount of times. You will have a person amount of jobs and career changes, right? You'll go through all those things. You will, as your family gets older, you will deal with loss a person amount of times. As a pastor, we go through those with you, but also with the person who sits next to you on a Sunday, or the person who sits behind you or in front of you. We go through those things alongside you a congregation amount of times. And what that does, it just gives us this different perspective to the rhythms of life. It gives us a sense of, oh, these are the things that people go through, and it helps us, shepherd people, lead people through those moments in kind of a unique way. And it's with that in mind that really trying to think through, what are we going to spend time talking about this week? I thought of it this way. So I want my kids, right, as we foster dogs, I want them to learn to do hard things for the sake of others, and we're going to meet people and we're going to help animals. But really, I want to teach my kids how to say goodbye. I want to teach my kids how to grieve while still holding on to hope. And I realize if I want that for my kids, that I also want that for you. I also want that for you, church, that you might have a sense of how to grieve while also holding on to hope. And I recognize this, that grief is not something that we are all comfortable with, right? And we can hold different amounts of it. And that's, that to be true just with all things. People can hold different amounts of things. When we bring groceries home from the grocery store, it's time for everybody to help bring groceries in. My oldest and our middle, they will load their arms up with boxes or with bags. And our youngest will usually look for, where's the loaf of bread? Where's the smallest thing that I can carry in both hands and then bring it in? He just carries a different amount of things than everybody else. And that can be with lots of things. That can be with grief. I have a friend here at our church, his name's Adam, who helps lead our cancer support group. And this last time that they gathered, I was with them. We're processing some loss we've gone through as a community. And Adam shared the story of a time, so a career ago for him, He was working in a group home for young guys, and that group home had experienced a loss. And one of the guys that Adam worked with brought a big bowl of ice water there. Said, hey guys, I want you to, in a moment, put your hand into that ice water and just hold it there for as long as you feel like you need to. Right? As they're grieving, he thought this would be they're going to put their hand in the ice water, hold it there as long as they're able to, and then they'll talk about it afterwards. And Adam tells the story that some put their hands in and it was real cold and they pulled those hands out pretty quickly. Others, kept their hands in there for a real long time before they pulled out. And then they talked together about how they each had different capacities for holding their hands in the ice. And similarly, they would all have different capacity for how long they could hold grief. And their job was to be there for each other. And you and I, we have different capacities to hold grief. And today, as we think about grieving while also holding on to hope, I want to look at a story from the life of Jesus, as I often will try to point us towards. And in that story, I want you to watch for how Jesus navigated grief and those around him who are navigating grief. And I want you to pay attention to the rhythms that Jesus models for us. So today's text is from the Gospel of John. It is chapter 11. We're going to start in verse 1. We're going to go all the way to verse 44. So I'm going to abridge a couple sections because it's a lot of verses. And I appreciate that you're listening or watching today. And I want you to hang with me because this is a good passage. And I think unpacking it together is going to be helpful. John writes this. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Now this Mary, John writes, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? Because remember, at this point in the story of Jesus, and if you're new to this, you think why would people want to take out Jesus? There was a group that really wanted Jesus to be king. They wanted him to be in charge of things, and Jesus was not interested in being a political figure primarily. That's not what he was interested in doing, and that made those people who wanted him to be king upset. It's a sermon for a different day, or it's a book that Pastor Jim wrote that you can actually buy on Amazon. And so there was some anger around that. But also, Jesus had the audacity to say that he was God incarnate. He was God's Son sent to rescue people from sin. And the religious leaders did not like that. And so those who wanted Jesus to be a political figure were upset. Those who wanted religious power and saw what Jesus was doing to kind of threaten that model for them, they were upset. And so his disciples go, hey, if we go back to that area, they're going to try to kill you, Jesus. In verse 14, John goes on to write, but then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so you may believe, but let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as the twin, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we might die with him. Now, this is the same Thomas who later is going to doubt most everything, right? He's going to stay a part of the group, but he's going to have all kinds of questions. But in this moment, he goes, yeah, okay, so here we go. We'll go to die with Lazarus and probably also with Jesus, because I think that's about what's about to happen. It doesn't happen till later, spoiler alert. Verse 17, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here and he's asking for you. John goes on to write in verse 32, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who'd come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor. He's been in there 4 days. And Jesus said, did I not tell you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And I want to point out some rhythms of Jesus in the midst of navigating the grief that those around him were experiencing. And I want to remind you that in stories like this and in times in our lives when we experience grief, that Jesus shows up, but not always on our timeline. And not always when we feel like we need him to, but always when we need it and when he knows that we need it. And those are two different things. We don't always get to pick when he shows up, but when he does, he listens. When Lazarus' sister accused Jesus of not being there, when the people around him said, couldn't this man have healed Lazarus? Jesus does not shut them down. He doesn't feel like he needs to stand up for himself. He just listens. And in your grief and in my grief and our grief, as we navigate hard things, as we navigate loss, Jesus meets us and he doesn't defend himself to us. He just listens. He takes on our accusations much the same that he takes on our grief with us. And then he does something. You know, our youth ministry here at the church, when we get our teenagers together, there's this big game we play together. It's like a big game of tag. When you get tagged, you have to kind of go to a timeout area. And we tell our students, when you're in that timeout area, if the leaders that are there, kind of making sure you stay in your timeout area, if you can tell one of those leaders a Bible verse, we'll let you go early. And is that silly? Yes. But also, do we think that committing scripture to memory is a helpful thing in the lives of young people and also in the lives of adults? We do, and so we incentivize it a bit. And there's always this one kid who knows as soon as they get caught, they can run up to that leader and say, John 11:35, Jesus wept. And they run away, because it's the shortest verse in all of Scripture. It's the easiest one to memorize. And I think out of all the gospel accounts, all of the things that Matthew and Mark and Luke and then John wrote, that those are some of the most powerful words that are in there. They're some of the most powerful words that John could have written about the life of Jesus. Because Jesus, even though he knew the way the story would go, from the time that he heard that Lazarus was sick, Jesus knew the end of the story. He knew the great things that would come. But in the midst of that, and in the midst of others grieving, Jesus shows up. And then he listens. And then Jesus wept. You see, Jesus does those things and he grieves. And then he makes all things new. But he doesn't start there. He doesn't start with, hey, stop being sad. It's going to be okay. Instead, he reminds us that we go through this together. And that God's going to be glorified on the back end, sure. But first, Jesus just shows up. And he listens. And he grieves with us. And then he makes things new. So today I want to spend a few minutes talking about what it looks like for us to hold on to those things and to hold on to that rhythm as Jesus followers. If you are watching this today, if you're listening to the podcast and you've gone through loss before, which is so many of us, my hope is someone has already said what I'm about to say to you before. But if not, I want to say them today in a way that you hear them. because all of us here will lose again. All of us here will need to grieve again. That's part of the experience of being human. And as a pastor, I've walked so many of you from our church through the grieving process. And we're not done yet. And so on this side of things, to the extent that I can, I want to give us a vocabulary or a context for us so that as we go through grief together, we have an idea of how we can support each other through it. So that as you are supported, you might support others. And as you support others, that one day they might come around to support you. And I want you to know this, that we all grieve, but we all grieve differently. And so it's with that in mind, I want to take a moment today and pause and stop reflecting on ourselves for a moment and instead take a moment to think about how we could help young people grieve. And here's why. No one teaches us how to do these things, right? Like when your kid is born, did you know, like, they don't give you a user manual? They look at you and they say, okay, well, your kid can now eat and they can breathe. Do you have a car seat? Here you go. And those are the boxes that they check, friends, when they hand a kid over to you. That's it. They don't go, hey, so someday as a family, you're going to go through something hard and you're going to need to grieve with your children, and so here's how. They don't do that. But for years now, for decades, as a pastor, I've gotten to walk through the mourning process with families and with children through some of the hardest moments of their lives. I've been through it with some of you who are watching today. And so I want to take a moment and go through some slides together that just kind of unpack at different ages how kids deal with grief. If you're listening to the podcast, you'll be able to find these slides, these resources later. If you go to our YouTube channel and you just scrub to this part of the video, it's youtube.com/reallife.la. Because I want to have these as a vocabulary for you. Even if you don't have kids at home, you're in a church that has kids, and God is calling you to be an extra voice in their lives. So I want to start with the youngest ones, the 0 to 2-year-olds. And as a family experiences loss, as a family experiences grief, like what's going on for them? And it really is as simple as, they are going to sense that there's a loss. They're going to sense it. They might not know much more than that, but they do pick up on the grief that is happening in the lives of their parents or their caretakers, and they notice that. And so sometimes that can throw off some of their eating, their sleeping, like some of their toilet habits, right? We don't have to talk about toilet habits a whole lot, but those things might change in the life of a 0 to 2-year-old. And so just being with them in the midst of that, knowing like, oh, this is how you experience grief, is really all you might need to do. But once those kids go from 0 to 2, they're in a block of ages from 2 years to 6 years. It gets a little more complicated. Those 2 to 6-year-olds, one of the things that they often play for imaginary play is they play grown-ups, right? Some of my favorite moments from growing up, some of my favorite memories, and we have some pictures of it, is me playing a house with one of my best friends, Kate Sheehy. And Kate and I would pretend to walk down an aisle together, and her dad, Doug, would play his guitar for us. I'm from a very small town, so small that my friend Kate's dad, Doug, is the person who played the guitar when Christine and I walked down the aisle at our actual wedding. But I have these memories of that, and that's because kids, when they do imaginary play, they play adults, which means that a kid whose family is going through grief or loss, and they're 2 to 6 years old, they might play some of that out. And that's just how they're processing it. That's how you can be with them in the midst of that, is allowing them to do some of those things. And remember, at those ages, kids function on kind of this day-to-day basis. They don't really know how time works. They definitely don't know how death works. You know this if ever you've told a young, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, hey, in a couple weeks we're going to go to Disney. We're going to go to Disneyland. What do they ask like 2 hours later? Are we going now? Right? The next day when they wake up, now is today the day? You're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that we're doing a thing from 2 weeks from now because you don't know how time works. Similarly, as a young person from the ages of 2 to 6 experience loss, they can have a day where they kind of forget that it happened. And then the next day remember again and go through the whole thing again, because that's how they experience life, really is day to day. And they think that when someone dies, they just keep doing things, just not where they are. So when we talk to a kid about that person's in heaven now, they think of heaven like it's just you're going to another city. Oh, like they went to Reno? And I know, Reno, not quite heaven, I understand. But I mean, biggest little city on earth. And that seems wild for us as adults to go, wait, but no, like it's different than that. They don't know. They just think that they're somewhere else, going to McDonald's somewhere else, buying groceries somewhere else. And that's just how they're processing. That's how their brain is working at the time. That person's gone, but they're probably still doing all of those people things just somewhere else. And at that age, they'll connect unrelated things, right? So if a young child learns that someone has died while they are eating a piece of pizza, they might wonder in the future, if I eat a piece of pizza, will someone die again? And so you get to reassure them, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. But just know that is one of the things that their brain will be doing, is trying to connect those things, often that are unrelated. And it's going to be day to day. And then when they get a little bit older, 6 to 9, their brains they're these little scientist brains at this point. They're really trying to figure out how the world works. But they still have a lot of kind of magical thinking around things. One of those ways that they have magical thinking is they think of death as a person, right? Cloak and a scythe, kind of when we say someone has died, they really think death has come to take that person away. And then they sometimes fear that death is contagious. That if death took that person away, what if death comes for someone else next? And so you get to reassure them that's not how it works. And though they are childlike in some of their imagination pieces around death, they then also start getting interested in, but what caused the death? And so if you have a 6 to 9-year-old and they're navigating grief and they start asking like, but what caused it? They're not trying to be callous. They're not trying to make you feel things that make you uncomfortable. It is just their brain going, okay, but like, how does this whole thing work? They're curious, right? And then you get into the preteen years, 9 to 12. And not only are they going to kind of wonder, like, so how does death work? They're going to be really curious, but what happened? What happened? It's going to be one of the things they primarily ask. And they need reassurance from adults, parents, grandparents, just other grown-ups in their life, that if you wish that someone dies, that doesn't make them die. Because they're going to start thinking through, oh, did that person die? Like, did I wish they wouldn't be around anymore? Is this like Home Alone? And now everyone has got, like, you get to reassure them that's not how it works. And they start thinking through, okay, so this happened to this person. What about the people who take care of me? Like, could they die? And they're going to start thinking through, then what would happen? I know recently we were talking to my youngest about death and grief and mourning. And he goes, but like, who will make us money? It's like, oh gosh, yeah, you're really getting into the details, and it's not callous, and they're not trying to, it's just how their brain is thinking, right? And they may even regress to earlier stages, and sleep might get hard for them again, right? Or some toilet stuff might get hard for them again. And that's just how they process. That's what's going on. But also there's this opportunity that happens in those preteen years, whereas they think about death, they also are more aware that there are bodies and there are souls, and those are a little different, and they start asking questions about the spiritual side of things. Before that, again, someone going to heaven is like someone going to Reno. I know different. Reno, different. I understand. But you get the thing I'm saying. But in those preteen years, they understand it's less of like they just went to another town. A different thing has happened. And so you get to explore that in a different way with them. And then in the teen years, you get to be there for conversations. Teenagers start to realize that really death is inevitable and irreversible. And so they need grown-ups to help guide them, to have conversations, but also just to listen and to talk with them. And teenagers, when a sad thing happens, when there's grieving, they often can, through no fault of your own, grown-ups, but they can often feel guilt or anger or responsibility for that death. They can think, maybe I did something and now this is punishment for that. And that's why this has happened. And you get to reassure them that is not why things happened. And then just be with them as they process and listen well. And I start asking questions like, so why do we live if we all just die, right? And it's a fair question. It's a fair question. I want to unpack that a little bit here in the next slide. But just know that teenagers, as they ask those things, it doesn't mean you failed them. It doesn't mean that you could have done something different, that they wouldn't think those things. That's often just the way that they're processing loss. And there are these rhythms to grief that I want you to know you can expect in your life or in your peers' lives as we navigate loss as adults. And it is this thing I want to remind you of, that we all grieve, but we all grieve differently. Here's what I mean by that. If someone is going through a hard thing, you get to be there for them, even if you've never grieved something like that before, right? You go, oh, I've only ever had to say goodbye to foster dogs before. I've never lost a parent, or I've never had to deal with that happening to a child. Yeah, all grief is different. Even if you and another person are in the same family and you lose the same person, you will experience that grief differently. So your job isn't to match grief to grief. Your job is just to be there, because we all grieve. We just all grieve differently. And know this, that the hope we have as Jesus followers, the hope we have that this life is not the end of things, that hope does not necessarily cancel out grief. You can hold both. Jesus, when he shows up and he listens and he mourns, he has hope that whole time. He knows how the story is going to end. He's literally Jesus, right? Even Martha, who has a sense for, oh yeah, I know, like Lazarus will live again. I get that. It was different than what she thought, but she had hope, and she still got to hold on to grief, and so do you. And so do the people around you. You can hold grief and hope at the same time. Hope does not cancel out grief. And you need to be ready for what I call grief boomerangs. It's this thing that happens as we grieve and as we mourn. That next Christmas, whatever that loss is going to be hard. And the Christmas after that is probably going to be hard too, but there will come a Christmas where it isn't as hard anymore. And then chances are you are going to grieve that you are not grieving in the way that you were grieving. That things have somehow gotten easier. And then there's grief associated with that. That's a grief boomerang where it comes back around. And sometimes we can see it coming. Sometimes we don't, and that boomerang just hits us. And I just want you to know that's just how grief works. And in those seasons when that's happening to the people around you, you get to be with them again. And you get to listen again. And you get to have grief with them again. And then we can talk about hope, but you gotta be there with them first. And caregivers need caregivers too, right? If you're that person in the family who's always taking care of everybody else, just remember, you need to let someone else also care for you. If you see that person who is trying to care for everyone else, remember they need a caregiver as well. They need someone to be with them and listen with them and to them and to grieve with them. And then I want to share something with you that I don't think we say enough, that I don't know if people have given you this vocabulary, but I think it's so important. It's important in our lives as teenagers kind of wrestle through, so if we all die, why are we even doing this? And it really is that we live, those of us who, we are breathing today, we are here today, we live to lead others toward life. And as Jesus followers, that life is bigger than what we can even really imagine on our own. And I like thinking about heaven not the way that maybe my neighbor thinks about heaven, but really the way Jesus talks about it, that it is God's kingdom that is to come, but it's also already here. It's near to us. And so I believe here on this side of things, we can experience glimpses of heaven. And as Jesus followers, we get to lead people toward that experience. And that's what we get to do. The days that we have here, those of us who are living as we go through grief, also, we live to lead others toward life. Not just heaven that is to come, but heaven that we can experience now through life in God's Spirit and through following the ways of Jesus. And some of you have been through this before, and I'm just putting words to things that you already know. Some of you, you have a therapist. Good job. And your therapist has already given you these tools, and that's great. But again, this is just from my seat as a parent, my seat as a pastor. I want to make sure that my kids, I want to make sure that you have a vocabulary and words and kind of a box to deal with when we navigate grief and loss together. And I say that to say this: we get to, as church, be there for each other. And your job isn't to compare grief in those times. Instead, your job is to follow the rhythm of Jesus, to be there, to listen, to then grieve. And after we've done those things, point people towards hope. Christian, that word really comes from little Christs. It was a nickname given to Jesus followers in the early church. And I think it's the thing that we can still carry today, that we get to be kind of little Jesuses in the lives of people, in that we get to follow the way that he did life, where he came alongside people. And I want you to think today, as we wrap our time together, like, who are those people who will be there for you the next time that you go through loss or grief? Who are those people who will mourn with you? And if you can't think of anyone, I'm so glad you're here today. I want you to know this. I've said this before, church, and I'll say it again, that crisis amplifies connectedness. So the next time you go through crisis, you will feel how connected or disconnected you are to others. And so today is the day to start deciding, okay, so who are my connections? Am I connected to people who are deeply connected to Jesus, so that the next time I go through crisis, that's what they have to offer? If the people you're most connected to are most connected to your work, the people you're most connected to are the people who are connected most to baseball or travel soccer, just know that the next time you're in crisis, that's what they're going to have to offer you. But if you're connected to people who are deeply connected to Jesus, the next time you're in crisis, the next time you're in grief or mourning, they'll be able to bring you back to a God who wants to go through that with you and point to hope afterwards. And then after we've thought through, so who are those people who will mourn with me? I want you to think through, and who are those people that I can be there for? Who are those people God's put me in their life to be there for? To say, hey, I'm with you, and I'm sorry with you, and I'm listening to you. But together, we're going to live in such a way that we get to point others towards life. We're going to use our life to point others towards life. We're going to use our life to point others towards Jesus for as many days as we have. That's what we get to do. And I hope we have one more. Because with that day, we're going to see how many other people we can point towards life, and we're going to do that together. And in doing that together and thinking through who will mourn with me, who will I mourn with, my hope is we also have people who can celebrate with us. We have people who we can celebrate with. Because church, you might have come here today, you might have gone onto the podcast or watched our YouTube channel going, it's summer, I want to be happy. And the message started out great because there were dogs and there were puppies and they were very cute. And they're like, but we're talking about grief. Like, what's the deal? I want you to know God's deep love for you in such a way that the next time you're going through a hard thing, you feel it then as well. And so it's with that I want to encourage us to follow the way of Jesus, to look for people we can be with as they grieve, that we would surround ourselves with others who are deeply connected to Jesus, who can be with us as we grieve, and that in doing that, we can experience hope together in the way that Jesus has designed us to experience it. Amen? Amen. Let me pray for us. God, we come before you thankful that you are a God who came to be with us, to rescue us, not just for a future thing, but even in our sorrow and in our trouble now, you come to be with us in that and then point us towards hope. And so, God, I ask that you would bring us healing where we need healing, that you would give us encouragement where we need encouragement. And God, that you'd open our eyes to see the people in the world around us that you've called us to care for, to be with, and to point towards you. We love you. We pray this in all things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks. Now go be the church.
There you have it. Thank you so much, Pastor Anthony, for sharing this amazing message with us today. It's not the most bright and cheery of messages, but it's so important for you to walk alongside, to support and pray with others as they're going through grief. And perhaps you've been through a season and you would love to ask more questions from one of the pastors here at the church, or you could use some prayer. Please reach out. info@reallife.la is the perfect email to send a prayer request or a support request to. We would love to walk alongside you and support you in this season. All that to say, today has been great. We are so thankful for you. We are cheering for you. We're praying for you. We will see you next time. Have a great week.